leads very nicely into our last talk from Jared, who's going to talk about financing a healthier wildlife tech ecosystem. So Jared, I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. Okay, thanks. Well, thanks again. It's really nice to be here. Thanks to everyone attending and Wild Labs for putting this on. I'm really quite excited for today's topic. This is my day-to-day world, really, and that's not directly biology or ecology or the NGO side of things, but the day-to-day financing of wildlife technology. I'm kind of trying to have a bit of a tongue-in-cheek and fun approach to this. So I'm going to be drawing some analogies between biological and ecological terms and the business systems around wildlife technology. It's meant to be a little fun, hopefully trigger a little bit of debate and other thinking on the topic. With that, the ultimate goal here is, I think, the same for everyone, which is that wildlife technology needs to be better and cheaper. And I'm here to partially advocate why private enterprise, such as my own, is one of the solutions for that. And again, what kind of is necessary for a healthy ecosystem to survive in that. Bit about Margo Supplies. We're a 45-year-old technology company. We're based in Canada with US operations. I've sold products all around the world, from rubber ammunition for polar bear deterrence to Svalbard, to radio network bird deterrence to the Nigerian Air Force. It's really been everywhere, but most of the base of the operations currently are Canada and the US. We're not totally alone in this field of companies. There's a whole tranche of businesses in 1980 to approximately 1995, kind of, that are still dominant in the field. You probably know a few of them, especially in tracking collars and audio listening devices. Why? Well, a few things. There was growing environmentalism. There's a disturbance event, and we're still seeing a lot of these same ones, which is availability of microelectronics, globalization, and trade. There's a lot of spending of government and NGO revenue at the time. And these kind of companies, similar to us, they're fairly small, often family operated. They really were too niche for big investments, and I'd argue largely in conservation technology that remains the case. But there's enough room for entrepreneurial individuals that could get by on, modest margins. And I guess for anyone curious, that's my dad on the left there. He built a net launcher, actually. Used all sorts of different capture projects, collaring caribou initially. There was this duck stuck under a bridge in Calgary with a six-pack ring on its neck. And anyway, he got it with his net gun. It was all on camera. He jumped off a bridge and broke his leg to do it. And that was in 1989. And then there's me on the right side. That's in a research camp in the Northwest Territories in Canada. And that's a bear and ground grizzly bear fence just around the camp. So that's a little bit about my background. And again, tying our kind of business to the wider legacy tranche of companies. Again, a lot of what I'm going to talk to about really applies to hardware technology companies like ours. And I guess like a good legacy company, my slides are pretty home built, and my marketing the same. So going to kind of talking about different rules in our system. Let's look at it this way. So first of all, it's characterized by scarce resources in wildlife technology or conservation technology. I argue that should always be the case. In fact, globally, I'm not sure how optimistic I am, but really, if there's more funding, we should just do more. Easy enough. So we're always going to be limited by resources. We should always be more efficient. We should try and get this technology cheaper and better. In my analogy, calories are capital. It's about energy transfer through the system. A lot of businesses, we can compare them to grazers, and they're really doing their own calculation, figuring out exactly where they have the most efficiency. For example, a radio frequency engineer, they're going to have a much lower cost base and advantage in designing telemetry collars than a random company that would have to hire that talent out. We're always trying to optimize. So just like grazers in the Serengeti are employing optimal foraging theory, we have our own theory. A lot of that is going to rely on cost, price, scale, and risk. And the combination of those provides a margin often. The margin is what is that business going to produce? What's the net return of the business? Couple other major factors there. Something that's worth knowing is caloric deficit, we'll call it, which is in this industry, the expenses often occur much before the income generated from those expenses. You're employing people, buying inventory, selling the product, delivering it. Often it's on net 30-day terms or longer to get paid. And that's kind of one of the core problems and really one of the stumbling blocks you often find on commercializing, and that's cash flow. Finally, we always have to grow. There's no option as a private business. That's the role you're in. The reason is because we all die in the end. Entropy gets us. We need to continually generating more resources to hold in our own little networks so that one bad winter or extinction event or whatever doesn't wipe us out. Going to know your species. So we'll talk about myself. We're a hardware company. I'm picking pretty favorable metaphors for our own business, but I do think it's true. Hardware companies are really slow growing. We can call this like an acropora coral on a reef system. We're building structure, moving inventory. It's one thing to talk about ideas, but when it comes to hardware, you got to buy parts. You have to store parts. You need forklifts. You need machinery. You need a shipping desk. You need all these resources. And so we're constantly building that. Scalable growth is possible. Again, this is wildlife. Really, we shouldn't. There's very little opportunity or likelihood of like 100 times growth like you hear in kind of startup culture. But sustainable, scalable growth does happen in these kind of hardware companies. What's interesting, and this I think might be less commonly known, is how competitive hardware is. Similar to coral reef, you may not just look at it in a still picture, but it's a landscape of constant competition, and that's primarily because hardware is scalable. The best product gets the vast majority of the sales. Again, hardware companies, I would say we are resilient, but vulnerable to our own bleaching events. We currently got, inflation, at least in certain economies, volatile currency, declining environmental regulations in some countries. And so, we'll see how it goes. Just a comparison for the service side, could call them a schooling fish or a sardines. There's huge biomass in the service side companies. The vast majority of that global spending in conservation technology or conservation users is often in theirs. These are going to be typically environmental compliance companies. They're going to be surveying major projects, often infrastructure thing. It's a compliance-driven market. It's really simple cash flow, and they kind of boom and bust. They show up when there's big projects. They go into holding patterns when they're not. Okay, kind of going on with our analogies. Let's talk about opportunity costs. Low opportunity costs. Ideas are cheap. I mean that semi-jokingly, but it is true. What really, it might not be cheap in terms of energy and talent, but what costs ongoing capital or calories? It's wages, freight, rent, tax compliance, other regulatory compliance, brokerage fees, forklifts, boxes, postage, electricity. The list goes on and on and on and on. What I think is important, though, for customers to understand is to have an idea of the dynamics of the ecosystem so you can get the best value for your dollar. A lot of the people likely on this call, let's call you basal resources. These are going to be kind of small, generally available sales opportunities for companies like mine. Keep in mind, wildlife businesses, we're all cyclical. This is not a giant secret, but you can look at a company like mine or any other one, and you can get a pretty good idea of likely when we have strong sales and likely when they're slow. And I'll tell you, I'm a lot happier to make a deal in January than when we're going crazy in bird migration in North America. Same thing. When we're working on bigger projects, we can't get marketing material. That's something NGOs, academics, these kind of partnerships exist there. Let's talk about pulsed resources. Again, the basal resources, you guys aren't really the target for these kind of private enterprise businesses. We're looking at contracts, government and industry in particular. These are super high risk, high cost, high competition. They're often highly regulated. There's going to be huge compliance costs. There's going to be huge just sales closing costs. They're often impossible to generate marketing material from. So when you're working, for example, with us at an airport, I can't go on an airport and just start taking pictures and throwing that airport's name around on our own website. And these things are slow to pay too as well. So I kind of think of that's your annual migration of wildebeest. You also have to be strong enough as a cheetah, but if you're a lion pride, you got to be strong enough as a pride to be able to take down that big prey. So again, I guess referring to customers as prey, I don't know what that says about me, but basal resources, really, really important. Understand your unique value, and that's how you get good deals. Can kind of keep going through these metaphors. Private enterprise, it has gone both ways, and I think we've seen a lot of rot in the system. And when I mentioned before about these high ongoing operating costs, what tends to happen is in medium and late cycles is it eats into R&D spending. When you get these kind of systems with just not enough R&D input, you create all sorts of long-term weaknesses. You'll see a lot of biomass in uninvested capital. And there's a few companies in our industry certainly that do this. If you see a company of 15 people and 10 of them are VPs of something, I can tell you right there, they're making too much money. Again, you have a system that's filled with these actors. It doesn't adapt to changing conditions. It's vulnerable to tail risk. Resilient forest, okay, we're going to see continuous recruitment. There should be a large, wide, or a broad age class of companies, new ones, medium term, legacy businesses, balanced, healthy competition. Capital should be moving just like in a forest. We want to see that energy not just sitting in one species, moving between them. It's biodiverse and stable. But I think the big thing is, just like a forest, this requires intervention and management similar to what we might see in North America with indigenous burning. Same kind of idea here. I'm going to make the point that as non-private actors, there's a role in to help shaping the ecosystem that advantages you and that you want to see. So here we go. Why though? I've kind of explained what private enterprise is. What's the value of it? Does it really matter? Can we just totally replace it? I would argue no, of course.
Just to flag, Jared, you got maybe like 1 minute.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I'll do okay. Thank you. We tend to be stable. Again, we talked about that. Long-term solutions. When you call us that year for a project, we're ready to go, experienced, and there's value in that. The ongoing product support improvement, cost reductions. But what really I want to highlight is access to non-conservation dollars for conservation output. Our companies had the highest impact as a business in conservation in our area of operations, I would say, for grizzly bear, wild human bear conflict. It's been sizable. For example, we fenced over 75 landfills in Alberta, BC, and the Yukon in many years past. The 75 landfills that used to have unrestricted access to garbage for bears. That didn't come from conservation. That money came from operating budgets of the landfills. We work with agriculture across provinces, and so there you go there. Now, for public and nonprofit actors, I'll be very quick. What you can do, you can encourage fierce, fair competition. Keep in mind fitness. Only 30% of small businesses in Canada survive 20 years. But as you can see on that graph afterwards, especially on the goods, that flattens out. And the biggest predictor of next year's survivability was your length of stay. Avoid single age class restoration. So we see a lot of grants in early stage startups, and that dries up the minute you show revenue. Still need to encourage that. So I encourage grants, I'd encourage opportunities, I'd encourage engaging. Not just early stage businesses. For folks like you, mix suppliers up, try different products. And one thing that our industry is a little notorious for is demand transparent pricing. Everything we sell on a retail level has an open price on it. You can't have fair competition or effective competition if you don't know the cost. So that's a few things on broad smattering of it. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you so much, Jared. I think these questions are coming up a lot and definitely are becoming more and more central to conversations about how we kind of create a sustainable innovation ecosystem, and something we think about from our funding grant side and everything. So super interesting to hear your perspective. We are already out of time, sadly, so we don't have time for questions now. But as always, we will stick around for after hours after we stop the recording. If anyone wants to hang around and pick Jared's brain or anyone else. So yeah, we'll just wrap up here. Thank you so much to our speakers, Luke, Tim, Ismael, and Jared. And thank you to all of you in the community for joining. And we will see you next time. Thanks so much.